Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our June 3rd, Tuesday at 3 webcast series event. This month's topic is our small business guide to cyber threats, security, and response. I'm Alan Falcon, CEO of Cumulus Global, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day or week to join us here live today or to be watching this recording on demand. A couple of pieces of information for those watching live today. You'll notice the audio is muted. This keeps us from being impacted by any background noise, hopefully. So please use the questions window. There's a logo across the top or right-hand side of your screen. It's the best way to reach me. When we will have time for Q&A at the end of the session, and I'll catch questions as appropriate as we go through the content as well. The session is being recorded and will be posted. We generally get it done within 24 hours, and feel free to share that with coworkers, acquaintances, other business leaders who you think might find the content valuable. A reminder that our third Tuesday at Webcasts are just one of the resources we provide. We've got a number of additions recently to our library of ebooks, documents, white papers, and infographics. So those titles are there up on the screen. Our upcoming third Tuesday at 3 webcast in July is going to be on the topic of email and security and compliance. There's some new info and new services out there that can really help protect you and your business. And a reminder that we did run a 3-part Next Normal series within our 3 webcasts, talking about work from home and remote, apps and systems and IT efficiency, all of which seem to have more prominence in the mindset right now, or the attention of our client base. As we headed into the pandemic, and now as we start to come out of the pandemic and come into whatever this next normal is going to be for each of us and each of our businesses. So feel free to tap our resources off our website as well anytime, and appreciate you being here. That said, enough of the housekeeping. Into the discussion, when we talk about cyber threats, security, and responses, let's start with the threats and a little bit of a situation analysis. And the big number right now is that when IT providers who service small, mid-sized organizations like ourselves are surveyed by the industry, we're hearing that 85% of us have reported ransomware attacks on our small, mid-sized business customers in the past 2 years. In fact, we don't have all of the data. The most recent published data out there is that almost 60% saw attacks. Even just in the first half of 2019, we know that heading into 2020 with the pandemic, the rate of cyber attack has actually increased about 400%. So we expect those numbers to continue to climb. We also know that small businesses themselves report being attacked by ransomware, about 1 in 5. Obviously a significant percentage of those attacks are in fact successful. We know there are other attacks that do go undetected because they are thwarted by protections in place, which is a good thing. Now, we know that of these attacks, 79% of cyber attacks happen because of compromised credentials, and there's a number of sources. The most common is phishing, and that really relates to a little over 90% of these successful attacks starting with some form of email, whether it's a phishing attack or what's known as a BEC, a business email compromise. There are a number of email-related attacks that can come to play. Sometimes it's simply a corrupt attachment on an otherwise legitimate email. And so given that credentials play such an important part in the cyber threat situation these days, particularly for our types of businesses and organizations, I want to cover some of the credential myths and reality. And the myth of sort of how a credential is compromised and used goes like this. Someone gets a hold of a username and password for an account. That person, the cyber attacker, logs into the account, and then bad things happen. They do things you don't want them to do, whether it's corrupt data, install malware, cause a data breach or leak, steal information, even to the point now we've got cyber attacks which are installing crypto mining programs that use up your processor or memory, burn out your computers, but the cryptocurrency generated goes back to the cyber attackers. The reality is somewhat different than this, right? Most of the time when a username password combination identity is compromised, it's going to be in some sort of hashed form. And so if the credentials are already cracked or available in free text, that's great. If not, the person who gets them probably is going to sell them to someone who can crack the code. Your Credentials now that have been cracked and are invisible in plain text are generally bundled with hundreds or thousands or millions of others and sold off as a stuffing list. And then people buy these lists and they'll test them on hundreds of sites and services. And the reason being is that we as human beings always, when we think about security, we always balance that with convenience. And so it's not uncommon for us to use the same password or very similar, nearly identical passwords across systems, particularly when those systems have the same email address as the username. So take a step back and think about, hey, I use my business email for my LinkedIn account. How similar is that password to my Google Workspace or my Microsoft 365 password? How similar is it to my bank or my Dropbox password? Things of that nature. It all comes into play and really creates the risk there. And this, gets combined with, it's not just this sort of focused on the, user identity, being cracked as far as username and password, but the cyber thieves are doing the same type of thing with other personally identifiable information. And that can be your name, your address, your zip code, your phone number, all are part of your social security number. It could also be, through internet games or, social media games. It can be your first car, your mother's middle name, your first boyfriend, the street you lived on growing up, your first cell phone number. All of those things where, people go online and play games, that information is often collected and sold because those can be answers to security questions that we use. So there's a lot going on here. And the fact is, there's a marketplace for your information. It's not just about someone breaking in and installing malware and holding you ransom. It's that someone's going to steal and crack your information. They're going to sell it to multiple people, each of which is going to try and break in and do you harm. And so this really comes out to be the chaos, what we call the chaos of credential convenience. A nice alliteration there, but it's really that studies have shown that 76% of us, human nature, will use the same password or very simple variations for multiple systems on and off the network. And so all of the logos you see here, and some are repetitive, are systems where people have been able to have their identity breached because of the fact that users have used that, the same email address and the same password or nearly identical password across multiple systems. And so it's a huge problem. It's growing. And let's face it, as a human, the convenience side of our brain, if you will, fights us when we think about, what we should do as far as unique passwords on every login, and how many logins we have and how many do we need to remember. And so, we look at that nature of the cyber threat. It's not that identity style threat is one type of attack, but it's not the only attack. And there's certainly other impacts around cyber attacks in general. And so the other attacks we still see, I want to say good old viruses because they've been around almost as long as computers have, right? Where, something happens and next thing you know, you've got a virus on your computer causing you pop-ups, causing disruption, maybe trying to steal data, maybe monitoring your network to grab credentials and sending them back to a server somewhere in Russia or Eastern Europe. We still have that. And viruses still come from sharing corrupted files, but now they can come and be downloaded, embedded in automatic content on websites, even websites you trust that have been hacked, or trusted websites that use third-party content providers who themselves have been hacked. We then have adware, which is clicking on the ad on a website, embedded malware. It's a fake ad. Spyware is watching what you're doing on your network, trying to gain other information to see if there's anything valuable that can be collected or stolen. Cryptojacking, I mentioned this a little bit earlier. This is where the cyber threat, the cyber attack will actually install crypto mining software that will generate cryptocurrency, whether it's Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency, providing that currency back to a wallet controlled by the attacker. And so you notice that, my server seems a little slow, or gee, for the last, 2 months, my server's been running at 100% CPU and my applications are slow. There's a hidden process in there somewhere that's actually using your processor, using your memory to mine for Bitcoin or other cryptocurrency. And then remote access Trojans. And this is really, tends to be more of a targeted attack, or where the attackers know who they're going after and looking to get in. And this is malware that goes in and basically monitors and maps out your network in a way and reports back. that helps people figure out how to gain access and bypass your security protocols and your security tools. And so what's the impact on your organization? Oftentimes, it's as basic as a loss of productivity. You get attacked, there's damage done, you have to shut down and rebuild and machines and restore data, reinstall a server. That might impact your business for a couple of days, but it can also be business threatening as an existential downtime. And we'll talk about it later. A lot of businesses, a majority of businesses that fall the victim of ransomware, for example, don't survive 6 months afterwards because of the broad impact. You can have loss of data, or even use the loss of devices. You can have attack spread across your network, where something that seems isolated is actually pervasive and happening. Additionally, you can find yourself at the wrong end of the law, and that certain types of being a victim of a cyber attack, and it can actually be considered a regulatory compliance violation, depending on the cause and how you react and respond. And so there are impacts that are both technical to your business, your data, your day-to-day operations. You'll have all of these have a financial impact, but you can also have regulatory impact, reputation impact, things of that nature. We'll talk about this a little bit more. And so we like to break the risks down into two classifications, operational and liability. And operational are the things you expect. It's downtime. You've got systems you can't work. It's going to impact productivity. It could disrupt your customer communications and your ability to respond to customer service requests. You might lose business or be unable to bid on business. It can put your payroll at risk. It can disrupt your cash flow. You can have loss of funds. And it all really depends on the type of attack and how you respond. So, we have, clients who've received those fake emails from the CEO to the CFO saying, hey, I'm traveling, this company's, we didn't pay them. Can you wire them the money today, please? And here's the amount, and here's who you wire it to. And it looks legit, like it comes from the CEO. He's traveling and not reachable. CFO goes ahead and makes the payment. Sometimes it's $5,000, sometimes it's $20,000. We're aware of companies that have lost hundreds of thousands of dollars that way. And certainly, if you lose your ability to generate invoices or run your collections in a timely manner, that's going to disrupt your cash flow. And for many businesses, a week or 3 weeks of disrupted cash flow can pose some serious financial problems. On the liability side, that's all operational, and none of it's good, right? All of it is disruptive and damaging, potentially deadly to your business. On the other side, sort of comes, okay, great, you have an attack, you address the operational risk, now what do you have to deal with, right? Well, one, you have to worry about, have you violated regulatory or industry compliance? Could there be fines? What government reporting has to be there, right? Not only the California Consumer Protection Act and GDPR out of the EU, but an increasing number of federal and even state-to-state regulations. So, for example, Massachusetts has a personally identifiable information law that requires certain types of breaches be disclosed within a certain time frame. You might find yourself in breach of contract as far as maintaining client confidentiality and non-disclosure agreements. Certainly, a breach or a cyber attack or something that affects your business can damage your reputation and your brand. There are some significant costs to get to a point where you can return to operations or be RTO. And if you're not a B2B organization, if you've got employee data that's compromised or consumer customer data that's compromising, you might be on the hook to provide consumer credit monitoring and services to the third-party victims of the attack, if you will. And so that's, not to be hyperbolic, but that's a sense of the threat. So now let's talk about cybersecurity, which is really about protecting your business. And I know when most people talk about cybersecurity, I hesitate and I sigh a little bit, because when most people talk about cybersecurity, they instantly think, oh, I need to protect my data. I need to protect my systems, right? How do I keep it out of my network? The reality is you're trying to protect your business. It's your technology, it's your data, it's your people. It's the operation of the business itself. It's an entity. And it's not just technologies, it's services you'll leverage, and it's policies and procedures that you put in place that work with those technology and services to create a security envelope, a security barrier around your business in its physical and its, internet and logical forms, if you will. And so the first piece that we talk about is communication and education, right? And that's really making sure that you and your entire team, every single person with access to technology who works for you directly or indirectly, should understand the threats. They should know the type of threats, the nature, the scope, the potential impact, and they should understand what behaviors that they do might be dangerous, right? Like you don't click on everything. And the only way to get that is really to spend time to teach and then to test, right? So this is trust and verify, if you will. So you want to teach your people to recognize trouble, what doesn't look quite right. What are safe behaviors, like hover and see to see if the reply address is actually, or if the URL on screen actually matches the URL that you're going to go to when you click a link in an email message, or that the from person is actually coming from the domain you expect, spelled correctly, and someone known to you. The editor's eye, is the wording normal? Is it bad English? Is it cryptic? Is it a little generic? Is it trying to use industry terms that don't apply to you and your business directly or effectively or accurately? Does the request or the information just not make sense? Does it pass the sniff test, if you will? And what do you do if you're not sure, right? Do you just go ahead and click or ignore it, or do you ask for help? And with that training on how to recognize the trouble and what safe behaviors are, you still want to test it. You want to send fake spam and fake phishing attacks and see who clicks, and might need reinforcement of the training or assistance in understanding how to recognize trouble and what those safe behaviors should be. And so communicate and educate is a huge defense, because human beings are the greatest weakness in any security system, right? The joke in the security industry is, if you want your business to be totally secure, never let your employees go home or talk to anyone outside of the building, right? Not feasible by any stretch of the imagination, but you get the drift there, right? The next component of cybersecurity is where we talk about prevention and protection, and they're closely related, and they sort of take two different angles at the same problem. And there's a whole range of factors we have to look at. As we started talking about earlier, credential compromise is the leading source of cyber attack, or the leading method, if you will, of cyber attack. And so what are some of the techniques you can use to protect identities, right? Having multi-factor authentication is one of the most effective. Having set processes for how you onboard and offboard employees and contractors. Enhancing your email security beyond just having basic DNS entries and an SPF record. There's some additional layers you can put in there that are no cost, low cost, that have a high impact. Putting in unified directory services, so you have one system that manages the identity. It's also referred to often as integrated identity and access management. If you're heavy into the cloud, having a cloud security access brokerage that maps your security rights and privileges by role across multiple cloud applications and services. And then, just because we know we use our business IDs, and will often use same passwords across multiple systems, some of which we don't control, monitor third-party systems for breaches that could create a risk to your environment. And that's sort of how we protect our identities, which is protecting the people. When you look at your endpoints, you still need antivirus, and we strongly recommend next-generation antivirus. It's a little more heuristical, that looks at behaviors, and preferably has the ability to do micro-level rollbacks. Mobile device management, not just for tablets and phones, but for laptops, and even treat desktops as a mobile device as well, that give you the ability to manage applications, manage data, wipe devices if you suspect there's a breach, manage security settings and group policies, and segregate personal activity and data from business activity and data. As I mentioned earlier, we're seeing an increasing number of attacks that are coming in invisible code that gets auto-downloaded on websites, whether it's embedded in a video stream that automatically plays or something else. So having web protection that filters that content and blocks known dangerous websites is important. And DNS protection helps prevent people from using your DNS as a vector attack against you or other people. Now, you still may have people working on premise. Your network should still be protected by firewalls. You should have software firewalls installed as well, in running even the operating system, the Windows firewall, for example, on individual laptops and servers. And ideally, to protect endpoints, consider a business continuity service where, and this really gets more to the recovery side, but it's more than just backing up the applications and data on that device. It's taking an image of that device, so if something goes wrong, whether it's a cyber attack or just a hardware failure, you can log into a virtual image of that device, continue working, and keep things protected. And so we've talked about people, we've talked about devices, let's talk about data. All of your data should be encrypted at rest as well as in transit. When we look at email, there's different levels. Most email services now have transport layer security encryption, or TLS. Some of that is generic, some of it's policy-based. Policy-based is better. If needed for regulatory or industry compliance, encryption of individual messages in your email system, we recommend advanced threat protection that does things like sandboxing, which will open attachments and watch their behavior before delivering the email to you. And there are now new tools and services for enhanced security and compliance. Similar strategy goes for data with cloud security and advanced threat protection, as well as file protections, and actively managing permissions, tracking and managing your external sharing and how that's done. You might need or want file level encryption for highly sensitive information, and SaaS subscription management, even knowing what applications people are using. And we know, for example, that we've seen companies that have a robust Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace environment, but individuals in the company have a personal preference, and they'll set up a personal Dropbox account and start sharing information through there. That opens you up to data leaks, to loss of control over information, potential risk, liability, and additional costs there as well. Not to mention some of those third-party services that people pick for convenience aren't necessarily the most secure and are more prone to third-party breaches that can impact your environment as well. So a lot to digest there, but really a holistic approach to user data. And it brings us into the cloud applications you're running. Now, whether it's a productivity suite or platform like Microsoft 365 or Google Workspace, or a specific application, maybe it's Adobe Cloud, maybe it's a line of business application, make sure you're taking advantage of any application-specific security and privacy rules. And you're not just turning on the basics, you're doing a full analysis configuration. Having some form of unified identity management and SSO, even with password management, gives you an added layer of security at the environmental level, and even lets you control which applications your employees and contractors see and know are available. If you're, we wouldn't have you store anything on your workstation or on a server on site if it wasn't being properly backed up, so you could restore that device and restore that data. The same is true for your data in your cloud services, whether it's an application like Salesforce, or your files and emails and contacts and calendar entries in Microsoft 365 and Google Workspace. In fact, both Microsoft and Google work on what's known as a shared responsibility model, where, they're backing up their systems and they're providing business continuity, but that's really to provide you the service. The protection of your data and the managing of the permissions and your ability to recover and restore data that's been lost or damaged is your responsibility. And so running those, if you're running those platforms without some form of backup and restore capability, is putting your data at risk. And it's no real different than running a file server that your business is totally dependent on in the computer closet, if you will, without having some appropriate form of backup and restore recovery capability there. Cloud apps, again, onboard and offboarding is important, not just for account setup and creation, because there's a cost factor there, but there's a security factor in managing the permissions and setting role-based permissions, and having that scripted so you know how to not only add someone in so they have access to what they need and not more, but what to do and how to address someone leaving the company, including that work that's owned by that individual that needs to be transferred to others. And that relates closely, obviously, with subscription and license management. And we've talked about the cloud access security brokers. And that's sort of, the things we see. What about the things we don't see? So, from an infrastructure, having managed firewall services, both hardware and software, protects your physical networks where they exist and your logical networks, which is, how your employees are connecting to the internet and connecting to your office. That remote device management, whether it's smartphone, tablet, or laptop, or desktop that someone's using at home, make sure that you're managing it so you know it's properly secured. You know that if you need to, you can brick it or delete the data. You know that personal applications and data aren't mixing with business applications and data. And obviously, it's great to have monitoring alerts. For small businesses, redundancy and failover can be quite expensive in sort of the traditional DR standpoint, but there are new business continuity and disaster recovery solutions that need not be or are not expensive that give you the ability to recover your systems to a state prior to the event quickly. We've got tools, for example, that can bring up servers and even workstations, in under 30 minutes and have you back up and running and let you run while you do the cleanup and the repair and the replacement as needed of the devices or the services that have been corrupted or failed. And so you can protect your infrastructure that way. And again, within what we've talked about email security, but I'm pulling it out on an additional slide here because it is so important. We know, right, that more than, with almost 80% of cyber attacks being compromised identities, we know that over 90 of those attacks are starting with some email, right? Now, in most cases, that's a phishing attack where an email is sent that someone's going to click a link and provide information they shouldn't, or confirm information that's in the email that they shouldn't confirm. And there are other issues about email interruption. I mentioned business email compromise, where people can pretend to be your business or someone in your business and what's there. And so right now we look at email security and we see 3 tiers. For lack of a more creative branding, we'll say you've got good, better, and best. And good really starts with SPF records, right? And SPF or is a mechanism that's in your DNS records that basically provides a list of valid IP addresses from which mail can be sent from your company. And so as a basic measure of protection, it's good but not great. And here's why. If someone can spoof your IP address or spoof the fact that it's coming from a service that you use, they can spoof email that's coming from you. Right? They can also use that to make an external email, an email coming from outside of your email system, look like it's coming from within your email system. And one of the challenges with SPF records is when you set up an SPF record, one of the parameters is what do you do if there's a fail, right? And you can do a hard rejection or you can do what's known as a soft fail. And services will often tell you if you're going to, include their service in your SPF record, if you're going to be sending email from their services, that their service may not work well if you do the hard fail. So most SPF records are set up with a soft fail, which means that it will catch most fraudulent message, or many fraudulent messages. It's not going to catch them all. And when it does catch fraudulent messages, it's really just warning the recipient to take a better look, right? It's actually not going to trigger that email to say, hey, this is definitely a bad email. And so it enhances the protections that the recipient has, but it's not a guarantee that bad email isn't going to get through. The other part that we see is good encryption is sort of the base level of transport layer security encryption or TLS encryption that we see. And that basic level, well, the very basic level, which we don't consider valid at all, is your email service has TLS encryption as an option. You don't turn it on and configure it. So for us, a base configuration is that TLS encryption is turned on so that if the recipient can receive encrypted email at the server through TLS encryption, then you encrypt. If not, you don't. A higher level is getting more specific, and this one really gets you into better coverage, is policy-based TLS encryption. Where you start with that single policy, but then you may have key partners in your supply chain or key customers where if their system isn't going to accept encrypted emails, you don't want to send the email at all. And you can configure that in. Also at the better level is we get into domain key identity management, or DKIM. And DKIM is better than SPF because remember, SPF gives a list of IP addresses that are legitimate senders, but that can be spoofed. And when people look at SPF records, if there is a mismatch, it doesn't necessarily cause the message to be identified definitely as a fail. It's a maybe. And then you're really up to how it gets processed later on. DKIM takes it one step further and it verifies you as a sender. So when you send a message, it's actually putting in an encrypted header in front of the message that works to help verify you as a sender. But again, this is not a foolproof system. Why? Because you can spoof, and you can spoof source information. The information in the email header that is visible to the end user doesn't have to match the information in the hidden part, or the system level part of the header and the email routing information. And so DKIM will let people know that the message hasn't been tampered with, but it's still not guaranteeing that the person who sent the email is who they said they are. And for that, you really need a less common service out there called DMARC. And DMARC actually verifies the claimed source of an email versus the actual source. And it gives you the ability to quarantine or simply block messages where those don't match. And that's a much higher level. And so one of the things that DMARC does for businesses is it prevents your identities from being spoofed. And so this is more protection as a sender. It's about deliverability and reputation than it is about preventing a bad message sent by someone else. But here's why it's important. Many of our customers have gotten emails, and I mentioned earlier, the business email compromise, that it looks like it's coming from one person in the company, but it's not. It looks and feels and behaves like an internal email message, but it's not. It's a targeted phishing attack, a spear phish, or a general phishing attack, or it's looking for you to wire funds, or it's looking, it's pretending to be from IT, confirming information that someone can use to gain credentials into your network and your system. And so having DMARC in place helps prevent and really goes the furthest to prevent your identity. So one of the things we see as an IT provider is a couple times a month we get a request from a company saying, hey, I need a quote on XYZ. Everything looks legitimate. It'd be very easy, and we know IT providers, as an example, that have answered those quotes and then taken a credit card and shipped product or to a location, only to find out that the credit card transaction gets successfully challenged because it was a stolen credit card tied to an individual or the business, and that the email never came from that business and you were communicating with a cyber thief and you're out that money. This is the same type of attack that would cause a CFO or an accountant or an accounts payable person to wire funds outside of the normal course of business because the emails look. And so DMARC protects you internally from emails that look like they're within your system but aren't. But it also protects your reputation, because we've talked, when we get these fake email messages, we call the business and say, are you aware, right, that this is happening? And oftentimes they're like, yeah, we're aware, but we call the police and there's nothing they can do, right? Or in some cases, they've gone the effort to contact the FBI and have offered to spend some time and money to help gather data to see if the FBI can track this down and stop these criminals. But at the same time, you've got your business out there, sometimes conveying messages and some kind, engaging in activity that, unless people realize it's not really your business, can hurt your reputation, or even create a financial liability for you. And so we're recommending that businesses start considering adding DMARC. In fact, in the next month, we'll be launching a new service where we can get DMARC up and running and managed for you in a way that's affordable to a smaller mid-sized company. The other part of BEST is mesh level encryption. And this is really driven by, most the encryption we've talked about up to date, up till now, has been server to server. Can I get my email? Can I get an email from my email server or service to your email service or server without anyone being able to intercept and read it? Probably can. The question is the message secure? Does the message need to be secure enough that there's a reasonable validation that the recipient is correct, right? And this comes into issues with PCI, with HIPAA compliance, in some cases Sarbanes-Oxley. It's important for lawyers. It's important for businesses that are dealing with intellectual property. where you are under non-disclosure. And so message level encryption effectively will notify the recipient that there's a secure message. There's some form of self-identification of the recipient, which gives them access to the message, the attachments, things of that nature. And so that's part of a best practice as well. And the question for your business is, is good enough? Should you be better, or do you need to be best as far as email security and compliance? We can help you walk through. That's part of the reason we're here, is we can help you look at your business, your industry, the types of information you're sending by email, and help you determine what level of email security is appropriate to protect your business. And so we've talked about security threats. We've talked about cyber threats. We've talked about cyber security. Now let's talk about cyber response. And again, too often people think about response, and what they're really thinking about, recover. How do I get my business running again? Right? And even that's incomplete. It should be, how do I get my business running again within a time frame that enables survival, right? And so cyber response is about business survival. And beyond recover, there's the respond, which is resolving all of the other issues, risks, and challenges that'll face your building, your business, if you will. Correction there. You're facing your business as a result of a successful cyber attack. And let's get into that. So we talk about respond and recover. There's business issue, there's business response, and technical response. And remember, some of the issues you're going to face as a business are going to be loss of money, loss of reputation, disruption of business activity and cash flow. You've got a potential public relations nightmare on your hand. You may, by industry or by government, have to report the breach and the extent of the breach. And if you have, depending on your customer base, you have customer issues, right? Where do you need a call center? Are you going to have enough customers calling to complain that you need additional resources answering the phone to explain what's going on? And if you're dealing with consumers, are you going to need to provide credit monitoring and credit services to your customer base because you're a breach? And a lot of that is about minimizing the financial loss or potential financial loss. Even if you have cyber insurance, you need to minimize the potential loss. And so when you respond to a cyber attack or a breach, there's forensics involved. There's legal advice that you're going to need to navigate the law and the regulatory requirements and your customer relationships and your contracts and your NDAs and everything else. There's a public relations component. And I want to say spin, but putting the best message possible out there to your customers to protect your brand and your reputation and your business. You may have to file regulatory reports, and some of that is legal and some of that's technical. And obviously we talked about customer interaction. The technical respond and recover is where you isolate the breach, which means understanding the scope, what was breached, what wasn't, what was disclosed or taken, what is suspect is being disclosed or taken, knowing that you've removed the threat and it can't happen again, or you've stopped it from happening and it can't happen again. Then there's the remediation, which goes beyond removing the threat. And that's where you start thinking about, okay, how do I rebuild? And remediation leads into recovery of your data, devices, potentially applications and services. And we've seen companies that have had to wipe the disk drives on every single one of their servers and rebuild them from scratch, reinstalling the operating system, doing firmware level wipes and reinstalling the operating system and all of their applications and bringing back the data and reinstalling custom code and reintegrating and resetting permissions. It can take days, it can take weeks. And the real goal of the technical response and recovery is how quickly can you return to normal operations? And it's not just return to operations. I know it says return to operations on the slide, and that's how the industry refers to it, but it's really return to normal operations. We spoke with a company that got hit with 3 successful cyber attacks in the period of about 6 months. The third one, the encryption actually affected their on-premise backup system, which was being synced, not stored offsite, but synced offsite. And so they lost their ability to recover any data because they couldn't decrypt the backup database so that they could do restores. And so they were able in about 4 days to buy new servers and wipe workstations and rebuild and start running the business, but it wasn't normal operations, because while they were trying to answer the phones and deal with customers and manage their production schedules, which had all been disrupted, they still had to go back and recover all of the data that was lost. And so that process took them about 14 months. They had to recall documents from offsite storage. They had to hire temps and companies to do data entry. They had to know that if a customer called and said, hey, this order I did from you 6 months ago, I want to reorder it, they'd have to have someone who could go to the physical file, see if they can find that order, what it was, and re-enter it in, which might even go so far as they had to re-enter product codes and everything and start that transaction and all the supporting data from scratch. So it's not just about returning to operations, it's how quickly you get to normal operations, because until your normal operations, you've got loss of productivity, loss of efficiency, and additional costs. Now, we know what's the impact of improper response and recovery. We know that more than 50% of small businesses hit by ransomware will fail within 6 months, that the level of disruption, even if not technically grand in scope, can have such an impact on the cash flow and reputation and ability of the business to operate that it can lead to failure. Sometimes it's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Sometimes it's, the catalyst that starts a sequence of events in motion that, result in a business closure. We also know that over a third of small businesses that pay ransom fail to recover their data. In some cases, the decryption keys never work. We know of a couple companies that actually paid the ransom more than once, got 3 different decryption keys, none of them worked before they gave up. Well, we also know that even when you get the decryption key, that the time it takes to decrypt the files and recover your data can be days and weeks, sometimes months. And so you may decide that you don't want to spend that time recovering all of your data, so you may fail to do it, or you may run out of time with your business survival before you actually are able to get all of the data you need back and recovered. So the question is, are you ready to react, or are you resilient? And so, ready to react means you're ready to rebuild clean systems, reinstall your applications and systems, recover data from backups, re-enter all your damaged and lost data. And the methods for this most companies have in place. You have some sort of backup and restore capability, hopefully for not only your data, but your systems, some bare metal restore for your key servers at least. And backup and restore is part of a broader disaster recovery plan. We recommend thinking in terms of resilience. So resilience obviously includes the communication and education, the prevention and protection we talked about, but it also means that your response mechanism, your recovery mechanism, includes technology that lets you relaunch your systems at a point before the attack, so that your application systems and data can be quickly in place, and your gap that you need to fill through restore or re-entry of data is minimal and can get you up and running. So we have clients now who we're taking the necessary snapshots 3 times a day. So we know if they're hit by a cyber attack or something happens to one of their systems physically, that within 30 minutes, we can have them up and running with less than a half a day of lost work. And that's a huge impact compared to, losing 3 years of data and not being able to recover, or taking 4 days to get back online. And then you've got to recover the day between your backups that was lost, plus all the work you've been doing in the interim. Excuse me. And so the methods for resilience really comes into business continuity services. It leverages technology such as remote desktop and virtual desktop infrastructures, and a view that you need to protect all of your devices, not just servers, not just cell phones and desktops. You got to cover the whole range of devices. And the last part of respond and recover is cyber insurance. And cyber insurance, as any insurance, is a policy you take that's meant to provide financial resources to help you recover or respond and respond to some form of loss or disaster. And there's 2 types of cyber insurance coverage. There are 2 components to your policy. One is first party coverage, which is your direct costs for things like your forensics, your data recovery, your marketing communications, as well as direct losses, transferred or stolen funds, loss of income coverage, and in many cases, ransomware payments. Although more and more cyber insurance policies will no longer cover those ransomware payments just because they're out of control right now, as we've seen in some of the highly publicized recent breaches and ransomware attacks. The second component of cyber insurance coverage is the third-party coverage, and this deals with some of those response impacts that we've talked about for your business. So it'll pay fines, it'll pay legal fees and defense costs if you're sued or if you have files, and it'll do settlements and verdicts that come against you, as well as potentially paying for services such as call center or help desk to help with your customer communications, or even cover the cost of credit monitoring. Now, the challenge with cyber insurance is not all policies are created equal. Many policies include fairly extensive underwriting and security audits. Other policies that are more simple don't have the rigor of the more intense audits, but you might end up paying more for that coverage. And so one of the roles we can play is help look at your security infrastructure, help you prepare to go after cyber insurance. We even partner with companies where we can provide interim coverages or supplemental coverages. For small businesses, even we can sponsor some private coverage with lower rigor on the audit and the physical requirements for your environment and the technical requirements for your environment, but still affordable to small and mid-sized businesses. So, but cyber insurance should be part of your plan. Your business should have it. So that said, if you notice, we walked through this, we've talked about threats, security, and response. I want to sort of say, we talked about response, respond and recover. Before that was how do you prevent and protect your business, and before that, how do you communicate and educate your people, so that there's awareness and a mindset that security is part of, and cybersecurity is part of, the zeitgeist, the operation of your business, the culture, the expectation. And that CPR model is our best practice model. And we help businesses like yours evaluate their security infrastructure, not just the technology, but the policies, procedures, the people, the industry you're in, the types of systems you're using, to make sure that you've got the pieces in place, that your team understands the risk and the impact, and the common sense and not so common sense things that they should be doing to avoid getting into trouble, the technologies and resources that can be in place to prevent and protect the business in its entirety, not just the data, but your systems, your devices, your people, your identities, etc. And then, since no protection and prevention system is foolproof, making sure you've got the resources in place that allow you to respond and recover, and do so in a way that minimizes the risk of significant damage or failure of your business. And that's how we can help. So what's your action item for all of this? One, assess your risk versus your protection and be realistic about it. If you say to yourself, well, we're too small to be a target, just know that the Colonial Pipeline, it's unclear. The people who produced the malware had no idea what Colonial Pipeline was or what the impact would be of an attack. In fact, the people who produced the ransomware that was used in the Colonial Pipeline attack didn't actually launch the attack. They sold it as a service. They had a customer who paid them to launch that attack on many companies, actually over 1 million companies. One of the companies just happened to be Colonial Pipeline. It was successful. They didn't do what they had to do. Next thing you know, they're shutting down the pipeline because operating it would have been dangerous and it was a threat to life and property. And so don't think that you're too small. Whether you think you're going to be a target attack or just caught in the net, chances are you'll be caught in the net. So assess that risk accurately. Don't kid yourself. Define the value proposition. Understand the cost benefits, and we can walk through that with you, of different solutions and the level of protection versus your level of risk. But also understand the cost of inaction. What if you do nothing and you're not adequately protected, and you end up having ransomware with a data breach, and some of your clients are in Massachusetts or California or Wisconsin, or jurisdictions with additional regulatory and legal protections and legal regulations you have to adhere to. You have a liability issue that could have you tied up in courts for years. And so understand the cost of inaction. Then plan, and we'll work with you on this. Let's talk about changes to your policies, how you're training your people, and the tech you have in place to come up with that CPR best model that best fits and best meets the needs and priorities of your business. And yes, one of your priorities is going to be budget. We can't build something you can't afford when we have to balance protection versus operational efficiency versus budget. All of that can be done. That's done easily. That's why we're here. And then you got to pull the trigger. We got to execute those plan changes. And so that's the step. So at this point, I've spoken probably a little bit too long. So while I take a sip of water, why don't you open that questions window along the top or right-hand side of your screen. And since we found that most of the people who watch our recordings exit out before the Q&A portion, I want to take a moment to, I'm going to stop the recording, but first I want to take a moment to thank the people who are watching this on demand for taking time out of your busy day. If you have any questions, you can reach us at info@cumulusglobal.com or the number on your screen. Let me go back. You can also reach me directly. My email address is on the screen, afalcon@cumulusglobal.com. That's my phone number. I will let you know I'm not good at answering voicemail messages. Please send me an email. Even my outbound message on voicemail tells you, please send an email. So sending me an email, myself or a member of my team will get back to you promptly to get your questions answered. And so for those watching the recording, thanks so much. Have a great day and hope to see you at a future event.